Tonight we'll show you what these convicted murderers and this Catholic bishop have in common.
And you'll see how this church helps keep a tradition alive for these children.
We'll also hear from some of the same children singing in praise, have some thoughts on prayer from Father Philip Boyle, and we'll see a performance from the International Youth Dancers.
Hello, I'm Monsignor Charles Minor.
And I'm Sean Hughescamp. Welcome to Real to Real.
The last several months and a few weeks have brought us through many changes, from the very rainy spell to the dry season and the terribly hot season. It's hard to say which way the seasons will take us next.
Well, at least with fall coming, maybe some cool, refreshing weather will come. And it will also provide us with an opportunity to learn more about a lot of different topics on Real to Real.
That's so right, Sean. For the fall brings us to very many kinds of changes. Last fall, when the United States bishops met in Washington, much media attention was given to their discussion of the nuclear arms race. But they also discussed another life and death issue, an issue which will very dramatically affect a special group in the United States, a story we shall see right now.
There are more than 150 criminals on death row in a Florida prison. 28 are incarcerated on Virginia's death row. These prisoners are part of a cycle of violence, a cycle that produces men like Robert Sullivan, a Boston native, convicted of first-degree murder.
I can understand why people would want crime reduced. However, capital punishment is not the answer to it. Capital punishment is not going to reduce crime in any way, shape, or form.
Many prisoners on death row are like Doug McCrae. They're black and they cannot afford attorneys. They live every day with death, never knowing when they'll face the signing of a death warrant. McCrae is accused of a rape murder, but he has difficulty believing other people's brutality.
Never in my entire life did I imagine or could even fathom that that a system would actually burn humans alive in order to echo to society that our actions in killing others are wrong.
It's a denial of forgiveness. It's a denial of the gospel message of love your enemies. And to me, it's contrary to the whole purpose of Christ. I can't imagine saying that we can find capital punishment in the gospel, and just the opposite. We find the result of capital punishment, the putting to death of Jesus.
Bishop Walter Sullivan of Richmond, Virginia, has long been a human life advocate. Within his Roman Catholic diocese, there are 28 inmates on death row. 5 condemned prisoners are Catholic.
What we find today, and this is what I find so very appalling, is the number of people now on death row. It's a sickness in society that in some way we're going to be better, or in some way we're going to be purified by having a sacrificial person. And what happens with capital punishment through the court system and legalities, who cannot get a fair trial or a just sentence are the poor, the minorities. It's no accident that the folks on death row are mainly very poor and mostly from the black or Hispanic communities.
In my first session of the legislature, when I was governor, I recommended and called upon our legislature to abolish the death penalty in Florida.
Leroy Collins, former governor of Florida, speaks earnestly against capital punishment. He says he faced an enormous dilemma while in office, the dilemma of whether or not he could uphold his convictions as a citizen and as a Christian while observing the duty imposed on him by the laws of Florida.
Over my period of 6 years, I signed and we executed 24 people. Some of those for crimes that have since been declared unconstitutional so far as the application of the death penalty is concerned. A large part of those were black people, a disproportionate part.
We're told that premeditation increases the gravity of the crime, and yet the state proceeds in killing others with a still more calculated and deliberate killing. I have been on death row for 8 years and 7 months, and yet the state still wishes me dead.
And so long as there's not a blanket stay by the 11th Circuit, and we feel that our statute is constitutional and we're not violating any U.S. Constitution standards in Governor Graham signing warrants, I will advise him to do what he really is bound to do under our state statute.
Jim Smith, Attorney General for the state of Florida, believes the death penalty acts as a deterrent to brutal crimes.
I personally believe that capital punishment is a deterrent. I admit statistically you can prove both sides of that issue. It certainly is a deterrent for the person who's executed.
The issues surrounding the use of capital punishment are confusing and contradictory. The Catholic bishops of the United States have stated in a pastoral letter that while the state has the right to take a life of a person guilty of an extremely serious crime, the question for judgment and decision is whether capital punishment is justifiable under present circumstances.
What has happened, there has been the great development of respect life. The last several years, there's been a whole sense of consistency. If we say that life is sacred, that life is inviolable, then you begin to question the policy, maybe not so much a teaching, but the policy, should the state really take the life of another, even someone who has committed a heinous crime?
The state of Florida, whose capital is in Tallahassee, recently re-elected a governor who believes in capital punishment. Although Governor Graham declined to be interviewed, his Assistant General Counsel, Art Wiedinger, spoke on his behalf.
I think the governor takes his responsibility as chief executive for the state very seriously, and the death penalty is one of the laws of the state, and he is bound to enforce that law. I think he, as he's expressed previously, he believes that it is a deterrent to crime, or at least to murder, and that's his major reason for supporting it.
The governor of this state says that he signs warrants because the citizens of this state, that they want and they believe in the death sentence. Why was my warrant signed? The 12 people serving as my jury, they recommended life. And yet, the governor, he signed my death warrant in the face of that.
There seems to be some sort of a double standard there. Do you, you know, if killing is wrong, then why should the state be in the killing business? I've never understood that quite well yet. I probably never will.
Millions of people joined convicted murderer Robert Sullivan in his dilemma. Why does the state kill? If the death penalty were abolished, we could perhaps do at least 4 things to help ourselves and people living on death row. We would abolish the cycle of violence. We would manifest our belief in the unique worth and dignity of each person. We would affirm our traditional belief, shared with Islamic and Jewish tradition, that God is the Lord of life. And we would show that people can follow the example of Jesus, who taught and practiced the forgiveness of injustice. Whether this witness room in a Virginia prison is ever used again for capital punishment remains to be seen.
As a Christian, I feel that it's clear that Christ would never condone a death penalty. In fact, he said, do no murder.
We'll never lose hope. I am obsessed, I would say, improving my innocence. We've come a long way, but I also know that I have to trust the same system of justice that put me here.
In Truman Capote's book, In Cold Blood, one witness to an execution asks another one, "What is the name of the executioner?" And the answer is, "We, the people." And that's what the issue of capital punishment comes down to. If the cycle of violence is to be broken, we, the people, must really think about and work about the sanctity of life.
There's a lot more tonight on Reel to Reel. In Expressions, we hear a song of praise from Indian children. In DABAR, Father Philip Boyle shares some thoughts on prayer, and in People and Places, we'll meet the International Youth Dancers. Stay with us.
Once, I was at a lake with my brother and his family. It was a steamy summer afternoon, and there were thousands of kids diving into the lake all around, cooling themselves off. And at one point in the conversation, my brother turned to me and said, "Wait." And he turned around and he looked and said, "I've got to watch my son." And there, across this lake, with all the commotion of all the kids jumping into the lake, was his son on top of the diving board going, "Yo, Dad, look! Yo, Dad, look!" And I turned around and very amazed, I said, "How did you know your son was there?" And very simply, he looked at me and said, "I know my son's voice." And that's exactly what God says to each of our hearts. I know your voice. Oftentimes we believe that there are so many people praying that God can't possibly hear our prayers. And even worse yet, sometimes we think that our prayers aren't significant as the other people's prayers. But the fact is that God hears everyone's prayers. In fact, He even knows our voice. And so when we pray, we should pray confidently, in a childlike simplicity, and remember the words of the gospel, that they who ask shall receive.
The International Youth Dancers of Richmond, Virginia are an example of Christian teenagers at their best.
The interesting thing that this particular group grew out of a request from young people themselves, saying we want to learn the clog dance, we want to learn international folk dancing, and we'd like to do it to share with others.
Led by Glenn Bannerman, professor of recreation at the Presbyterian School of Christian Education, these 7th through 12th graders spend much of their free time entertaining in nursing homes, prisons, hospitals, and folk festivals. Members of the group make their own costumes and must come to practice once a week in addition to their performances.
Part of what we are trying to do is to make the scriptural kinds of stuff that speaks about joy, of rejoicing, of peace, compassion, all of that become a reality through the kinds of things that we do. The fact that they go to have fun and to share that fun with others, they learn an awful lot about other people, learn a lot about themselves. They learn something of what it is to be in service, to give of themselves without anything in return.
The youth dancers not only perform, but give their audience a chance to participate in the dances.
If you watch the expressions on their faces, you know, that's the applause. So to help them, though, feel a part of the enthusiasm, that's when you have to give forth a little more of the oomph from yourself besides just the dancing. There's an awful lot that says, this is how you behave. This is how you interact with people. This is the good news of the gospel.
The International Youth Dancers work hard to preserve traditional folk dances while spreading goodwill throughout the community.
We've been here almost 300 years, 1692 to 1983, almost 300 years, and something got to happen here.
The romantic view of the old missions is an attraction to many tourists to the southwestern United States, and some of these old missions, like the one we're going to visit near Tucson, Arizona, continue as cultural and worship centers in the middle of the tourist boom.
The San Javier DABAR, or White Dove of the Desert Mission, is rich in both the religious and historical foundations of this country. Located west of Tucson, Arizona, and occupying an area nearly the size of the state of Connecticut, it is a vast semi-arid region in the desert southwest of the United States. During our beginnings as a nation, the Papago Indians had free reign of this land and were known as great hunters. In 1692, a Jesuit priest, Padre Kino, founded several missions in the southwest, one of which became the San Javier Mission. He brought much more than Christianity to the Papago people.
He brought not only Christianity, but he brought something that turned out to be a great boon to our desert. He brought wheat and cattle. and he was kind of a circuit rider. At no time during his life was he ever able to reside here or even build a church. He had a tremendous piece of real estate to cover.
Father Kino died in 1711. Several years later, the Jesuits were banned from all Spanish land. The following year, the Franciscans from central Mexico replaced the Jesuits. Led by Father Francisco Garcet, the Franciscans took over the mission and have remained here to this day. Influenced by a blend of American Indian and Mexican traditions, the San Javier mission has endured for close to 300 years.
According to Spanish law, the missionary was supposed to stay here only 10 years, and then the people would begin to operate in Hispanic society and to take over the functions of administrations of religion. We've been here almost 300 years, 1692 to 1983, almost 300 years, and something got to happen here.
Father Kieran McCarty, rector of the San Javier Mission, is both a historian for the mission and a part-time research specialist for the University of Arizona. During the course of his studies, he has noticed the lack of Papago Indians with either the ambition or desire to enter the teachings of a monastery or convent.
And the reason that they balk at this is really no mystery. We mentioned before that they've been used to having missionaries around for nearly 300 years. So when we suggest to them, well, why don't you become a deacon or you become a priest, they counter with a very intelligent question. They say, why don't you like to be here? Don't you like us? So they received this whole thing as a package. It was given to them as a package, and they blindly, so to speak, accepted it. And now when we ask them to change the thing around, they say that's dirty pool. That's not fair.
To 90% of the Papago population are devout Catholics, and throughout the years they have held fast their devotion to God. Their faith has endured the tests of time and misfortune.
Their faith is basically, I believe in God, and God is in everything. The earth, the plants, the animals, and I take care of them. And God's in my family.
They came here and took the water away from you. Would you like that? Okay. Would any of you? No. Okay. So that's what happened in the colonies. They didn't take water.
We're committed to these people to give them the service of the church because and education, because we feel the only way that they're going to kind of come out of themselves and be able to compete with the non-Indian and still be comfortable with themselves is through religion and education.
What were those laws called?
Care is taken in teaching these children both the English culture and their own Indian heritage. Both will be equally important to them when they become adults in today's society. Sister Henrietta, principal of the mission school, encourages all of her students to continue their education, but feels that the knowledge gained must be channeled back to the reservation.
Say, for example, I have 20 youngsters now. If out of that 20, I could get 5 or maybe 10 to really want to go on, get an education, but then come back and use it to bring their own people up. Not to go off the reservation and get a job and work somewhere else, but to get an education and come back, be part of their district council, work in their own clinic instead of having all whites work in the clinic, get their own dentists, some doctors among their own people who would understand their medicine men and their ways and could work hand in hand with the people they have right now.
San Javier is unlike most parishes in the United States. Because of the thousands of tourists who travel through the mission annually, Father Walter Hawley, pastor and religious superior, is unable to maintain a normal Mass schedule for his congregation.
I find that the tourists here are a mixed blessing. Certainly, they help us financially. We wouldn't be able to make it in a lot of ways without the sales in our gift shop and their donations at Sunday Mass and the collection and so on. But it also prevents us from using the church as a regular parish church much of the time.
And one thing they do resent is the fact that the church is not their own. It's very difficult to have masses, weddings, funerals, that you don't come out and somebody's with a camera ready to take your picture.
Despite the unwanted attention and their difficulties in assimilation into modern society, the Papago people have never lost their devotion to the saints or their faith in God.
One of the traditions that the Papago people here in San Javier, and I think on all of their entire reservation, is devotion to the saints. And many homes, perhaps most of the homes, have little sections of room or a part of a room set aside where they will have all of their saints, their statues, and they use that as kind of their prayer room where they will come and pray. And then they will ask the saints, of course, to protect them and look after them.
The Papagos have also adapted a traditional ceremony from Mexico in which they ask San Javier for healing and forgiveness.
The devotion to St. Francis Xavier is very ancient here in our desert, and our people tend to externalize that devotion by, when they receive a favor through the saint's intercession, that they'll bring out a little depiction of some way of externalizing the favor they asked for and received, and pin it on the saint.
It is the goal of the White Dove of the Desert Mission that the future of the Papago people be paved with a well-rounded education, spiritual growth, and a firm desire to use those skills to improve their future existence. Their faith will surely brave the storm.
I think that, you know, they're truly Christian, and they rise to the challenge just like other Christians would rise to the challenge.
Theirs is a very, very, very simple faith. It's not a structured faith. You don't have the structure of the church per se as law or regulation. They just believe in God and their saints.
Viewing that delightful story about the Indians, the children, and their culture is a happiness, but at the same time, it's a puzzle for me. Why is it that we go visit our Indian brothers and sisters as Americans, but we go as tourists? It's a puzzle because I think we are afraid to live with our past heritage.
And something you had said before is that we isolate our past from our present in this society, and that perhaps that's one of the reasons we have such difficulty dealing with death.
It's issues like these and so many more we can address here on Reel to Reel. We hope you can join us again right here next week.
Next week on Reel to Reel, we meet a man who is fighting hard to give dropouts another chance.
And we'll hear the language of angels.
We'll meet Amanda the panda
and see one man's vision of his faith. Thank you for joining us, and good night.
See you next week. Good night.
And God bless you.